is Tara Webb. Today I'm really excited to be talking about colorism in sports. So I was preparing for this week's session, colorism in sports, taking notes, and I was like, oh, this is a vast topic of colorism. So we're going to talk about as much as we can, but I realize that there is so many facets and nuances of sports in general, just like sports itself has so many different buckets and categories and things to consider. But we'll also try to unpack a little bit how colorism shows up for athletes and in the sports world in general. Before we jump into all of that, say hello. Let me know where you're tuning in from. Y'all know how I start off every live session. I like to see where folks are at. And then I have a few announcements as well. So the Colorism Healing Writing Contest, I've been saying it every week since January, I believe, is in its final month. So this is the last month to get your submissions in. We accept all forms of writing from all people around the world, as long as you have something to say about colorism, either sharing your experience or your perspective or your opinion about colorism. And the deadline for that is April 30th. I also have another really big announcement that I'm excited about. I have officially prepared and launched a group coaching program. So it'll be live group coaching. It's kind of an in-between between like taking an online class and doing one-on-one coaching. So live sessions with a small group of dark-skinned women. So this is a pilot program for me. I've been doing individual coaching for a few months now, and that has been going really well. But I also want to offer group coaching, and I'm trying it out. So don't worry if you don't fit into the category of dark-skinned women now. I'm also planning to do an allyship course for people who want to be allies in the fight against colorism. I'll be doing that at some point. But I wanted to start off with just group coaching, dedicated, safe space for dark-skinned women who want to heal in a supportive group environment. So that'll be going live on my birthday, June 6th, 2021. So I'll be posting about that in my stories and linking to it on Facebook and all the platforms. So I'm excited to roll that out. Hey, Jandy, what's up? What's up? Who else is on here? Hey, everybody. What's up, folks? Y'all are quiet today. We are talking about colorism in sports. Let me try to pin a comment. I've never pinned a comment before. Colorism in sports. There we go. I pinned a comment for the first time ever on Instagram. Hey, Mellow and Chill, what's up? Hey, Nelly Poo 22. Oh my gosh, I love your screen name. I've loved the number 22 these days. And then I didn't even, think about, you're doing amazing work. So grateful. Issa Trey, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to working on this group coaching piece. Because I feel like that kind of work needs to exist in the world. And I have like all these things in me and I'm like, get it out, put it out. So I'm working diligently, like taking it one step at a time. But all right, let's jump into the topic. Also bring your questions and comments as always. I'm really curious to see what people have to say on this topic. There were some interesting comments on my Instagram feed in terms of people's observations about colorism in sports, specific athletes and things like that. So I want to jump off by talking about the money piece, because I think that's something very quantifiable, right? It's like a very tangible thing that we can look at. So we know that with colorism in general, there are inequalities between lighter-skinned people of color and darker-skinned people of color when it comes to wages and income and wealth, and across different sectors of society, different sectors of jobs and employment. A lot of that has to do with, it's both the generational cycle of poverty. So even going back to the colonial period during slavery and things like that in the United States, lighter-skinned African Americans, lighter-skinned immigrants from other countries were more likely to get hired, to gain employment, and when they are employed, they also tend to make higher wages than people with darker skin tones. And so the question is, does that still remain true in the sports arena, right? So there are some questions that come up when we think about sports, because you might think, well, it's more of a objective metric in terms of who is a good athlete, right? Who actually performs. It might appear to be more objective. If you score more points, if you kick more soccer goals, if you get more touchdowns, right? Then you would think that that influences how you're paid. And so I wanted to make this a combination of like both research and anecdotes. So one thing I'll say too is that there's not as much research on colorism in sports as there is on race in sports. And I've talked about this in the past. Hey, Miss CG. I've talked about this in the past where there's a lot more research about racism, because racism is the metric that we collect information on, right? If we look at census data, if we look at surveys of all types, surveys for taking a standardized test, right? All these documentations, even when you're entering college, right? When you're going through your college admissions process, they all collect information about your race or your ethnicity, right? But it's very rare for us to collect information about skin tone. And so people have to do a lot more in terms of the research process to do research on colorism. So in terms of colorism in sports, there's still a severe lack of sufficient research in that area, and that's just the way it is. But as I mentioned in my post for the week, the understanding that colorism is systemic, meaning it stretches across all areas of society. It's not isolated or siloed into just beauty pageants, or it's not isolated or siloed into just dating and the marriage, right? So it does impact every area of our culture. And so one of the research articles I looked at, they found a hard time. They looked at a very small segment of athletes known as NBA free agents. It's fun talking about sports. I don't think y'all have ever heard me talk about sports. But I do like sports. I played sports in high school and stuff like that. But NBA free agents, that was their study, focused on. So right off the bat, they're not looking at every sport. They're not even looking at the totality of the NBA, right? And so their research is very limited, but it's some of what's out there currently, right? And so they didn't find strong correlations between pay inequalities in terms of NBA free agents, right? They saw that skin tone really didn't impact how much they would get paid in terms of signing contracts with the NBA. However, they noticed and they looked at pay discrimination for customers versus employers, right? And so customers meaning like fans, buying merchandise or things like that. And they noticed more discrimination in cities where there was greater diversity, right? Where there were a larger population of not just Black people and white people, but also Hispanic and Latinx people and Asian people, right? So it was interesting to find that the more diverse the city was, the more discrimination they saw in terms of how fans and customers spent their money based on the NBA free agents and athletes and things like that. But again, that is very small in terms of the possible research that could be done when it comes to pay and salary in sports. Let's see. Jandel Crutch says it's in the blood. The blood goes everywhere in the body. Yeah, that's a great analogy. Absolutely. Yeah. So this bias, this discrimination can be compared to the blood in our circulatory system, right? Systemic. Yes, blood is systemic. It goes all over the system. Issa Trey says, I'm sure you'll get there, but Serena is persecuted for her Blackness and complexion, whereas Naomi Osaka is praised for hers. Very weird. Capital C colorism. Oh, Issa Trey, I'm working my way there. And Jandel Crutch is co-signing that. Oh yeah. And that's why I included Serena at the top of my Instagram post, because first of all, I just love me some Serena, but it's so obvious and so deep. Okay, so let me keep rolling so we can get to that juicy bit of information there as well. But another aspect of pay especially when we get to professional athlete status and Olympic status, right? So not so much high school and college sports, but thinking about nationally recognized names, people who win national championships and things like that. There's definitely colorism within endorsements because the endorsement, it plays into the athlete's performance, but it's also about their marketability, their perceived marketability in terms of selling products or selling a brand. And one of the best examples, and this came up in the comments too on my Instagram post, one of the best examples I found just in the short time that I was, gathering notes for this talk was Lolo Jones, the track and field star. She's a star, but we must take into account that she never actually won any Olympic medals. And I didn't know this until I started, refreshing my memory on all these things, but there was another Olympic hurdler. She has a hyphenated last name. I think it's like Harder Nelson or something like that. Harper Nelson. And she actually won a gold medal and a silver medal, right? But she's very dark skinned. And if you compare the amount of endorsements she received versus someone like Lolo Jones, who was very fair skinned, had straight hair, mixed race, received way more endorsements with no medals than the darker skinned track and field athlete who had won 2 medals, like a gold medal plus a silver medal, right? And so I think we see a lot of that in the endorsement arena. And so Lolo Jones not only got like the financial endorsements, but she was more likely to be featured on magazine covers, right? That's clearly that beauty bias. And so, yes, that's not their actual on-field performance, but it still impacts their overall salary, right? Their overall income and net worth. I see y'all. I love y'all's comments. And I'm not doing a chat today, so I have time to stop and read all the comments. I'm loving the red glasses. Oh, thank you. You've seen these before. Issa Trey says this right here. Oh, wow. This right here. Yeah. Gabby Douglas and the whole hair thing. Still in absolute disgust over that. Yes, mellow and chill. I'm getting to the hair thing too. See? Y'all, we're on the same page, right? Same vibe, right? Because someone brought up Serena. You're bringing up Gabby Douglas. And like I wrote an open letter to Gabby Douglas after that happened on my blog. This was years ago. And I talked about how, because with her it was the hair, but I also think there was a lot of featureism at play because Gabby Douglas, she's not I wouldn't consider her very dark skinned, but her features are very, Afrocentric. She has full lips, a wide, nose, and on top of the hair texture thing. Janelle says, wow, didn't even get medals, but got paid. Yeah, exactly. So, and it's funny because I went to LSU for my PhD program. And so I believe I saw Lolo Jones once, practicing on the field. But it was off in the distance. And so it's not, again, I have to say this because I know the vitriol that we usually get from talking about colorism. It's not to say Lolo Jones shouldn't get endorsements, but as I was telling my sister, we need to keep that same energy for the darker skinned women who actually achieved status and actually won the medals, right? So not trying to take away her endorsements, but saying we need equitable endorsements for the dark skinned woman in proportion to the amount of medals she actually won, right? And the other thing I want to say about money and income is the class thing. So I'll kind of talk about the pipeline, right? Who gets to be an athlete in the first place has a lot to do with money, moolah, financial capital, right? And this also came up in the comments because I am in a community of brilliant minds and I love it. But thinking about, sports clinics and sports camps when you're younger, right? Just to even train for some of these sports is really, really expensive. And we know that lighter skinned individuals across all racial and ethnic groups are also more likely to be financially well off relative to the darker skinned people of their group, right? They're more likely to have access to financial resources especially if we consider biracial or mixed race people as well, then the financial disparity increases even more. And so the class piece being so closely tied to color, skin tone in this country also impacts and influences why we see, especially in more expensive sports, right? Like figure skating, for example, or even like winter sports, right? There's like this disproportionate, and we see it across racial lines too, why it's Black people, for example, or people of color are less likely to play certain types of sports. A lot of it is not always about a lack of interest in those sports. It's about a lack of access to those sports, right? It's about a lack of access in terms of, even transportation to the local gym or like to go to a ski resort and learn to ski. Just learning how to ski in and of itself is like a class thing that so many of us, Black folks did not have access to, right? And so we have to consider not just how much money you make once you become a star athlete, but that money played a big factor in you becoming that athlete in the first place. And then I also commented, in response to that comment on my post, that when you're lighter skinned, I think about Misty Copeland, the ballet dancer. Even though ballet is considered an art and not a sport, I feel like you have to be really athletic to be a ballet dancer. I think ballet dancers are just as athletic as anybody else, right? But thinking about who gets scholarships, right? Who gets sponsored? Who do people want to take under their wing? So even if a lighter skinned person is not financially well off, are they more likely to gain sympathy from wealthy benefactors, right? Are they more likely to be recruited and given scholarships to these very expensive and costly programs and clinics and trainings and, one-on-one trainings? Janelle Crush says, wow, didn't even, okay, yes. Okay, cool. I'm keeping up with my comments here. I just Googled Lolo Jones, infuriated. Issa Trey, yeah. I haven't heard much of her or from her since, but during those years, those Olympic Games, she was a big name. Belly Bela, my mom and lots of fam went to LSU. Oh, cool. Yeah. I went to LSU for a short time in undergrad. Really, Bella and Chill? So you weren't always an international figure, were you? Or I guess maybe technically you're still international no matter what country you live in. When you think about it. Right. Keep that same energy. Yes. Keep the same energy, right? 2-parent household, multi-generational money. Yeah. 2-parent households is also a class factor, so this is slightly off from the sports topic, but when we talk about marriage rates and the inequality in terms of darker skinned women getting married versus lighter skinned women getting married, that's an economic boost for women is marriage, right? And there's research outside of race and color. There's just research in terms of how divorce, when parents divorce, the woman takes a hit financially, right? Whereas the man tends to be better off financially. But there's also research that shows that for women in different cultures too, marriage gives them or affords them greater financial stability, right? And that's a historic reality too. We know in history it was like even worse when women weren't allowed into the job force. Well, white women weren't allowed into the job force. Black women were always forced into the job force. And a lot of times Black men were denied the job force, right? We'll have to pin that conversation for later. But yeah, so there's so much in terms of, so many nuances in terms of class, economics, and money, okay? And then now I'm getting into some of the stereotypes, right? This is like the colorist biases when it comes to athletes. Not about a lack of interest, about a lack of access. 100%. Issa Trey, I think gymnastics camp was $1,000 a week. What? For an 8-week camp when I was a kid? My mom bought a trampoline instead. Well, right. Oh my gosh, $1,000 a week. Are you serious? Woo, that is, wow. Belly Baylor says, it's huge for many organized sports, money and looks, also huge in dance community. Yeah, there was this one article that I took notes from was talking about cheerleading. So I guess I'll talk about that since you're bringing that up in the chat now. Also, athletes are getting lighter. A lot of big players have black daddy and white mamas. Oh, come on now. That's a good point, right? I.e. Steph Curry. Yeah, and even, so this, I don't know if this is not the case with Kobe Bryant, but a lot of the athletes are the children of other athletes. And because athletes, black men athletes in particular, have habits of marrying non-black women, their children are mixed race, and they're entering into the sports arena, right? And gaining prominence there as well. Janelle Hayden, there is this idea of blackness equating masculinity, and it can be so harmful for especially darker skinned black women. This is so prominent in sports when athletes. Yes, absolutely, Janelle Hayden. Thank you for that comment. That's something I wanted to highlight as well in terms of how stereotypes play out in in sports, in a race, if we're talking about track and field. For example, Serena Williams, her femininity is always questioned. Yes, absolutely. But it's so funny because when I look at Serena, I'm like, that is a woman. You know what I'm saying? Like, she is definitely a woman, like in terms of the iconography of womanhood. You know what I mean? So it's so strange to me that she's considered less feminine. Belly Baylor, retired black ballers and their white wives have become the pipeline. That's a good point. That pipeline of being the offspring of a former athlete, tied with the colorist practices of those athletes disproportionately marrying white women. Mellow and Chill, I feel like NBA coaches are either other POC or light-skinned black. That's a good point. I don't know many black NBA coaches, period. Or either, yeah. See, and this is why I like it to be a conversation, because there are some things about sports that y'all will know that I simply do not. But in terms of the uniformity when it comes to dance and cheerleading or team sports, even synchronized swimming, right, came up in one thing. For darker skinned athletes, they might be discriminated against because they don't fit the uniform, right? So if you want things to look the same, things to be uniformed, the coaches, the people making the decisions about who makes the team in the first place, or who gets to perform at a big, competition, they might have a bias that says, well, the team looks more uniform. The dance team looks more uniform. The cheerleading team looks more uniformed when we have these lighter skinned black people on the team, on the squad, right? And then the hair piece for black women, especially, right? When it comes to uniform. And this is where the Gabby Douglas discrimination came in at too. But for example, if you are on a gymnastics team or on a cheerleading team or on a drill team, right? And you say, oh, we're all going to put our hair in buns, and we're all going to put our hair up in buns, and we're all going to wear pigtails, right? That inherently discriminates against darker skinned people, or people with 4C hair, right? Because not all dark skinned people have my hair type. So in terms of just the hair, black athletes, especially black women athletes, black female athletes, are already having to overcome greater obstacles, greater hurdles in terms of being accepted on that team. And at the beginning of this, I know some people hopped on late, I was talking about when I started gathering my notes, I realized how massive this topic was, colorism in sports, because there's even a difference in team sports versus individual sports, right? And how colorism might play out differently for individual versus team sports. But for team sports, especially women's sports, where, coaches and judges have a bias in terms of what looks uniform, what looks, in line with the rest of the team, darker skinned people, as well as people with tighter curl patterns in their hair, are already alienated or ostracized or marginalized in certain ways. But then in terms of something like gymnastics, those are sports where judges make decisions. So it's not like basketball where it's like, it's obvious the ball went inside the net, right? Like there's no need to judge that. You made the goal. Like in soccer, the ball went inside the goal. You scored the point. But for something like cheerleading or dance or gymnastics or figure skating was another one that came up. where judges are making subjective calls, right? Even with the rules in place, even with the metrics in place, at the end of the day, it's still an individual person with their biases, making that subjective call. And so the color bias will definitely factor into, oh, well, she seems more graceful. This skater or this gymnast just seemed more graceful to me, right? So I'm going to give them a higher score. Versus, and even in gymnastics, this is not necessarily about color, but I think about like Black forms of dance and being incorporated into gymnastics. We've seen a lot of Black gymnasts like get 10 out of 10s for doing their thing. But I think that's a relatively recent phenomenon. But the thing that was so upsetting about Gabby Douglas, though, is that she overcame the racial colorist biases of the judges and won the all-around gold medal. And it was other Black people, like out in the world, ostracizing her and bullying her because her hair didn't look the way they thought it should, right? And then actually one of the hurdler that I mentioned, the dark-skinned hurdler, she talks about how when she gets ready to run a race, she says, I have to make sure my hair is perfect. I have to make sure my nails are perfect. I have to put makeup on to look my best, right? And so these athletes, especially women athletes, especially Black women athletes, especially dark-skinned Black women athletes, can't just focus on their game. They feel like they can't just focus on performing their best, running their best race. They feel like they also have to look pretty, look gorgeous, look beautiful while doing it, right? Part of it is to get endorsements, but also part of it is just, avoiding what happened to Gabby Douglas, right? And the fact that her accomplishment was diminished amongst the African-American community because her hair was pinned up and her edges weren't laid, basically. I got a pet peeve about laid edges, but it's heartbreaking, you know what I mean? To know that historic accomplishment, the first Black person to win that title ever in the world, and y'all are essentially being racist towards her, being texturist and colorist, right? It was very infuriating. I saw a lot of comments coming through, so let me scroll back up. I wish the comments would pause on the last one I read so that I don't have to scroll back up. It sets white or Eurocentric as the default. Everything does, yeah. The uniform whiteness is the uniform. That's what that makes me think of. Good point. Sports with subjectivity have lots of inherent bias. Gymnastics, they're like, her toe leaned to the right. Yeah, gymnastics, negative 12 points, huh? Right. Janelle Hayden, Black women are always held to a higher and almost impossible standard. Definitely bias and discrimination at work, 100%. It was us, Janelle saying about, the meaning of Gabby Douglas. It was us. I was like, really? She overcame all the racial, colorist, sexist biases of the gymnastics world, and only to be ostracized by her own people. It's, it was frustrating. So the other thing about hair, I talked about the uniformity piece and like saying we're all going to wear pigtails or we're all going to wear our hair a certain way. But even the act of sweating, y'all know, Black women, y'all know what I'm about to say, okay? And this goes even to like high school, elementary school kids, like little girls. Their parents might not even let them play sports because, well, no, I just got your hair done. You ain't about to sweat out your relaxer today. You ain't about to sweat out your perm out there playing soccer. You know what I mean? And so even working out, going to the gym, a lot of Black women have chosen to forego those activities in preservation of the upkeep of their hair, especially when they choose to relax it. I even think about a sport like swimming. And we talk about, Black people don't swim, which is the stereotype, but that is rooted in the racist history of Black people not being allowed to use swimming pools not being afforded access to swimming pools, not having the social class to have swimming pools in their backyard or to know friends who have swimming pools, right? So again, that access piece has a lot to do with swimming. But Black girls, also the challenge, right? If they choose to, especially if they choose to wear their hair straight, of swimming every day, jumping into a pool, and what do I do with my hair, and the shame around that. And someone commented on my post that they would feel shame when their hair would be frizzy or puffy after sweating a lot, right, in sports. And so I think even the choice, right, to really pursue sports the way they might have otherwise if hair was not such a contentious issue for them, right? But then even if they do choose to pursue it, the added stress, the added pressure to quote unquote do something with your hair is a lot, right? And you think about the compounding effect of that, the compounding effect that before a game, you're already like, okay, I want to preserve my hair. The after a game, right? Instead of like just recovering and celebrating, you're like, oh my gosh, I have to do something with my hair. Like that has to take a toll on the longevity of your performance, right? Belly Bella says, yes, it was us. You are right. Knit Stitches and Blocks, welcome. I like to see return visitors. Oh, Steph Curry's mom is Black. Okay, good to know. Sharon Bennett. I don't know her. The hair thing is interesting. I will not let my girls leave the house with messy hair for fear of them being judged or like they come from nowhere. Yeah. And so I see like little white girls all the time with messy hair, with like flyaways. Their ponytails are like loose and sagging, right? And so again, that double standard that if you're a Black girl, you have to be really put together in order to be seen as acceptable or to be seen as classy. Awake Warrior, sad, I live in Georgia. It is 80 degrees now, and we should be real and earth-facey. Yeah, Iha Delarisha, Steph Curry's mom is Black, light-skinned woman. Yeah, Sherry Bennett just shared that on the Facebook. Issa Trey, I promise I will not make the entire live about my failed gymnastics career, but I legit got made fun of because my teammates didn't like how spritz smelled and why couldn't I use regular hairspray. Wow. See, and that's the other component too of the team sports dynamic is fitting in with the team. I quit my track team not because of racism. I feel like I wasn't enjoying myself because I didn't fit in with the rest of the track team. But that is definitely an aspect that Black athletes have to contend with. But especially if they are darker skinned and they are, their hair texture is such that it requires different types of hair care, right? That alienation, again, makes it harder. It's another obstacle that you have to deal with as an athlete that your white teammates don't have to deal with, or that your lighter skinned teammates with looser curl patterns or whatever don't have to think about or deal with, on top of trying to be the best athlete you could be. I'm grateful my dad is let me be. He is too crazy to be judgy. That's funny. There is nothing wrong with messy hair on a child. I fear it transmit harmful messages. Yeah, let children be kids. Let kids be kids. Let children be children. Belly Bela, to worry or express worry about child's hair. Yeah. Perfumist staff, many of our hair issues and challenges come from conforming with relaxers, heat tools, which leads to excessive breakage and hair loss. I think that's in an effort to fit into the society's ideals of beauty and what beautiful hair is supposed to be, and what constitutes beauty in terms of Black women in particular. All right, so I cover, Oh, there was an interesting thing that I found when I was reading through some of these articles on sports specifically. but that during the time that baseball was segregated, when there was a Major League Baseball and there was the Negro Leagues, that Latinx baseball players were put into the various leagues based on how light or dark their skin was. So that's an ethnic group, right? That can be, you can be white Latinx, you can be a black Latinx person, but it was based on how you looked, right? So if you were white passing, then you got to play in the Major League Baseball league. And if you weren't, but you were still Latinx, you were put into the Negro Leagues, which was an interesting thing I hadn't known about. Now I want to talk about the stereotypes themselves, right? Somebody commented about how bullying, light-skinned male athletes in particular, get bullied. And so this is where the conversation of Steph Curry comes in, because I think he brought this to the forefront. His presence in basketball really brought this to the forefront for a lot of people in terms of perceptions of who's athletic, who's considered a good athlete, right? And I've said it before in my conversations around gender and colorism, and one of you all mentioned it here on this live as well, that darker skinned people are perceived to be stronger, to be more masculine, to be more aggressive, to have more physical capabilities, right? And so that would appear to benefit in sports. That, where you're stronger, you're faster, you can jump farther and jump higher. So you would think that that's a stereotype that works in your favor as an athlete, right? But then there's the stereotype on the other side of the spectrum, where if you're lighter skinned, you have more refined skills. You have a better understanding of the game. You have more craft. You have more technique. You have more control, right? That you've been trained. You've harnessed smarts about the game, and you're able to be strategic and strategize. And your skill is based on training and practice versus merely having a physical advantage, right? If you're lighter skinned. And so these stereotypes exist in all areas of society, right? We talk about why is it that darker skinned Black people are perceived to be more threatening by police officers, right? It's that same stereotype that you are more aggressive, that you are sneakier, that you are more of a threat. And so in sports, we definitely see that play out in terms of one recent study, actually, which looked at the announcers and commentators and how I just realized I don't have earrings on. This is not usual for me. Sorry. The sports commentators and the sports announcers, we see those same stereotypes in how they describe the game, how they describe the players for college basketball was the study. But you can see this in all sports if you pay attention. But for lighter skinned athletes of all races, those athletes were described as being smarter, having more control over the ball, having better strategy, right? Whereas the darker skinned athletes were described, the announcers would comment more on their bodies, on their height, on their size, right? In terms of their performance. And there was a direct correlation between perception of performance and lighter skin tone, right? Across all racial groups for college basketball players. Now, again, the research is limited, so they haven't, as far as I know, they don't have this similar research to be done in soccer or football or golf. You know what I mean? So there's so many different types of sports where there's not the official research. But I think if we are observant, we might see, or we're likely to see similar patterns, right? Because it's true, where white athletes are perceived to be smarter athletes. And so that perception lingers, right, for other racial groups that are lighter in skin tone. And There's, again, the athlete who scores the goal, right, is who has the stats, who has the statistics on paper, they have the stats to back them up, but in terms of perceived subjective beliefs about who's the better athlete, right? If you were having an argument about Steph Curry versus LeBron James, for example, right? Their stats might be comparable, and I don't know if this is true, y'all, because I don't know these stats, okay? So I'm just throwing out a random example. But if their stats are comparable, you might see Hall of Fame inductees or commentators or, again, endorsement deals that make assumptions that the lighter skinned person is the more skilled person, right? Let me look at these comments that are coming in. Good point, not often thought of in this way. More level-headed, less temperamental, more approachable. Oh, Issa Trey, that reminds me too, in terms of the subjective calls, in terms of fouls on the court, on basketball courts in particular. And even thinking about Serena Williams and how the referees, so again, even in sports where the score at the end of the game tends to be an objective metric, there are more subjective calls throughout the game that can sway the outcome, right? Especially in tennis, right? And we see that all the time with Serena Williams getting all kind of bad calls, and then being told that she's being too aggressive because she wants to challenge the referee for making a bad call. And in terms of calling fouls on people, right? Are referees more likely to be surveilling the darker skinned players for making illegal moves or illegal plays, right? Whereas they might miss similar behaviors or similar activities for lighter skinned athletes, right? So that was one of the things that came up in that article as well. So even the subjectivity in terms of, like you were saying, seen as less temperamental or more approachable. Belly Bela, this is why it often bothers me when women say they only like dark-skinned men, especially when light-skinned women saying it. It's like people see dark-skinned men as bucks. Belly Bela, that is also a pet peeve of mine, because a lot of times it is lighter-skinned women who are trying to prove that they are not colorist, is oftentimes how I see it, right? A lot of light-skinned women will talk about how much they love dark-skinned men. For example, I like to date dark-skinned men. And I don't think they're aware of how that can become a fetish, just like anybody else, right? Who says, oh, I love this particular thing. But even light-skinned women not recognizing their privilege and being able to choose who they prefer to date because they have those options more readily available to them, right? Darker skinned men also prefer you as a lighter skinned woman. So there's that factor as well. But yeah, that stereotype that persists in dating, right? Where you're strong, you're masculine. It also is playing out in sports, as we see. Elevated Conjure. I don't follow sports, but I'm following this convo. I'm curious if dark-skinned athletes get access to good care, aftercare, especially if they're seen as stronger, more masculine. Elevated Conjure, that is an excellent question. Thank you for bringing that up. So again, I haven't come across any articles that specifically focus on that, but there are lots of articles that talk about the disparity in healthcare for darker skinned people in general, right? So they don't specify athletes, but darker skinned people have been documented to report lower health outcomes and less equitable access to good health care. Elevated Conjure, and I know as professionals, they probably have access to it, but is it encouraged as a form of care and not just upkeep of capitalism / their ability to make money? Ooh, I like the nuance that you're getting into right there, Elevated Conjure. I like that question of how it's a matter of humanity, right? Like, is it like we care about you as a person versus we just want to get as much out of you while we can, right? Especially in a sport like football, for example, right? Like we're just going to run your body into the ground and milk your talents for all we can get to win some championships and make money for ourselves too? Or do we actually want you to be healthy and well and have as much use of your body as you can after you retire from this sport, right? Three dummy? Wow, yeah, I'm from Portland, and they called a certain era of players the jailblazers. Whoa, because they were darker skinned men that were smoking weed and more aggressive on the court. Wow, see? Yeah, and my brother and I were talking about the Portland Trailblazers because the picture I included of Steph Curry was with the Trailblazers when they were playing the Trailblazers. Janelle Hayden, preference isn't just preference, it's a manifestation of colorism and even racism. Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Elevated conjure, right. That's exactly what I'm wondering about. Yeah, so again, there's no documentation in terms of what we would consider legitimate research that focuses on athletes in that regard. But the hypothesis would be that, yes, it's not equitable even for athletes. And I think about Serena Williams, right, as a dark-skinned athlete who could afford the best healthcare possible and how she almost died giving childbirth, and the lack of attention and care. This wasn't directly related to like recovery or maintaining her body for the sport per se, but it just goes to show that as a darker skinned Black woman, her money, her financial capital did not override the racist and colorist bias that she encountered in her experience with the healthcare system, right? And I think that's an important example. I haven't seen a lot of people talking about that and how someone like Serena Williams almost died giving birth. And so imagine what women who don't have the money, who don't have the social capital that Serena Williams has, have to endure when they are going to hospitals and seeking health care. So I think that I'm thinking about an article by Michael Eric Dyson that I read back when Steph Curry was first becoming famous. And he was even before this other article came out, he was talking about those stereotypes about being hard, being aggressive, the physical prowess, the brute strength. But he also talked about how, I like the quote that he used there, because he was basically defending Steph Curry and saying like, oh, he really is talented. And so we need to take this opportunity to unpack where these colorist stereotypes come from, right? And how it actually harms us to perpetuate them. And so there are a lot of like dark-skinned men, for example, who played with Steph Curry, who also had internalized those stereotypes about themselves and about lighter-skinned men, right? So these darker-skinned basketball players would say things like, oh, I was shocked that Steph could actually play. Like, I was like, oh, he actually is a great player. And like, we're not used to seeing guys like him where I'm from, like in the hood, and even the assumption that, hood is associated with a certain complexion or a certain type of person, right? But yeah, so a lot of times I've even seen Black people take pride in those stereotypes, right? Like darker skin people, like, yeah, we're just naturally faster and we're stronger and we are more physically capable, right? And not really thinking critically about what that does, what that belief does, the consequences of those kinds of beliefs, right? I see a question here. I don't see the text though. What are your thoughts about baby hairs and edges laid? I'll have to get to that. I'm gonna come back to that one. Lost my train of thought. Let's see. Elevated Conscious says that it also reminds me of the Black doctor who passed from COVID a few months ago. Yes, exactly. And the care team she was assigned at whatever hospital she was at was not listening to her and didn't believe her. Yes, right? And I posted on my personal Facebook page one time that, hospitals, like the racism in healthcare actually kills more Black people than police officers. And thinking about the Black Lives Matter movement extending to not just instances of police brutality, right? But how there's so much death in this country as a result of racism in other areas, especially the medical field, the medical profession. Because there was another Black woman, she went to the emergency room telling the people at the front desk that she couldn't breathe. And they were telling her, oh, you're fine, just leave. We're not really gonna check you out, we're overcrowded. And she refused to leave. And I wouldn't leave either if I couldn't breathe, okay? And they called the cops on her. The cops escorted her out and she died in the parking lot in the hands of the cops, right? At a hospital that was refusing to treat her because of their racist, and also she was a heavyset woman too, right? So not only was she Black, she was dark brown, she was heavyset as well. So all those, and probably low socioeconomic status, right? So all those stereotypes were working against her in that scenario because they just didn't believe her. And she died at the hospital. Not because they tried to save her life and couldn't, but because they just didn't even think or care to examine her and see if something might be wrong, right? And I'm getting passionate about this right now because it makes me angry. The racism in healthcare kills more Black people than police officers. Yeah, you can quote me on that. I'll admit I don't have actual statistics. I don't have actual statistics on that, but I mean, again, I would bet that that's, a case. I feel like there was one other thing I wanted to talk about. I'm nearing the end, y'all. So any other questions? Oh, the baby hairs. I'll talk about the baby hairs thing. Who asked this question? Let me go back to that. So Marilyn 99-2002. What are your thoughts about baby hairs and edges laid? I have to do a segment on hair again. But I don't think anything's wrong with it. I just see it as another form of texturism or hairism, where the natural frizzing up, right, that happens naturally is, the assumption is that, oh, it should be slick. It should be slick. It should lay down. It should lay flat, right? And I think that's just the perception, right, of hair in general, is that it should be laying down, it should be straight and slick and flat. So the edges piece, I think, is so indicative of hair texture. And so I think people pay close attention to the baby hairs and the edges because it's where your hair texture will reveal itself most readily, right? Even if you wear your hair straight, like it's those edges that will reveal your true hair texture. We used to call it new growth, like when you're between relaxers. True. I think that is why I locked my hair. Yeah. My niece and nephew are getting locks. That's a word though. I could not even imagine, but this is healing to know there are a group of people who see the truth and the pain. Oh yeah, we see it. We see it. I'm at over 10,000 followers now. And not all of my followers, agree with me. I'll say that, right? Like, y'all, they're not just on here like, yeah, everything Dr. Webb says is true, because I get a lot of comments that prove otherwise. But what it shows to me, I was like, wow, there are 10,000 people who acknowledge colorism. Like, what? And obviously there are other accounts with more followers than that, right? Like there are some accounts that address colorism that have like hundreds of thousands of followers. But just the idea that we can find people who acknowledge colorism, acknowledge what it is, acknowledge that it's systemic and are wanting to talk about it, right? I think it's a beautiful thing. So I appreciate y'all for being here with me. Thank you for sticking with me through this like really complex conversation. Again, my apologies on misidentifying the race of Steph Curry's mother. I didn't, research his background specifically. So thanks for that clarification. Will it change ever? Will it change ever? Ooh, this is a big question. I think for now I'm going to say I hope it changes. And regardless of whether or not it does change, I have to go to my grave knowing I did everything in my power to make it change. In order for me to sleep at night, I have to know that I did my part. And so, like, for me, like, showing up to do this work is not even about, like, oh, we're going to eradicate colorism. But it's like my conscience, right? When I go to meet my maker and they're like, what did you do with your life, Sarah? I have to be able to, look and say, I did everything I could to help people heal from colorism and to stop the system of discrimination that exists, right? And I used to say that too. My friends used to be like, well, it's no point in arguing with people or debating with people because they're not going to change their minds. They're not going to change. And I always say, when I speak up about something, it's never to change someone's mind, but it's to put it on record that I disagree, right? Because if I'm silent when people are doing something or saying something, then the history books will say like, oh, well, this happened and Sarah didn't say anything, right? So if you're writing a history book about this moment, I want the record to show, A, that I disagreed with that colorist or racist or sexist or homophobic statement, and that I had an alternative perspective, right? So I got to clean my side of the street, no matter what the rest of the world decides to do. All right. We appreciate you, your knowledge and passion to educate at large. Yes, I'm so passionate about it. Which reminds me again, group coaching is available. The limit is 8 people. So I'm accepting 8 dark-skinned women into group coaching starting on my birthday, June 6th, 2021. And I'll post more specific details about it in the coming days, but I wanted to take this live opportunity to talk about it now. Thank you so much for the conversation, this space. Thank you, Elevated Conjure, for your thoughtful insights, as always. I think this, on Instagram in particular, the conversations in the comments and on the live streams have really helped me like grow and deepen my thinking even more. So I want to acknowledge that. I want to acknowledge all of you, that you sharpen me like iron sharpens iron, right? Like y'all keep me sharp in terms of my analysis of colorism as well. So I appreciate it. 3 Dummies says, I wish it wasn't so late. This is really important for how much Black people make up of the sports industry. Yes, Black people are in sports, especially certain sports. And I wish there was more research. Like, I hope more people do like that serious research on colorism in sports. But I think there's like a lot of gaps in the research. So if anybody's going to school to do research, consider studying colorism in sports because there's just not a lot out there. All right, folks, I will see you all next week. Nah, I'm Just Pretty is supposed to be my guest for next week. So a lot of you follow her as well. But she is a social enterprise. She uses her business to raise awareness about colorism and to try and promote and foster change as well. Love y'all. It's hard to go. I actually don't want to go. I don't want to get off. But I will, because I'm done with all of my notes. I've gone through all of my notes. All right, submit to the contest. The deadline is April 30th. Take care. I'll see y'all next week, though. Bye. Mwah.